Hello. Hey, Mizpah. Let me pull up the chat on my phone. There we go. Let me share my screen. And let's jump into it. Let me set on. Set up do not disturb here. Okay. So one small change I made just in the last couple of minutes before going live. Anyone who was watching the stream yesterday might recall when we added the Tailwind Forms plugin, the global default styles for inputs was messing with our inputs here. So what I have done is I used the configuration that is available for the plugin to say that instead of generating global styles that apply to all inputs of the various types, generate classes. And so I updated that. And then in our forms, in our authentication forms only, I'm using the form input class. And then along the way, I also just simplified the classes that we're using. I'm just using the simple classes from this demo. So just a bit fewer classes. And so now these forms, these inputs, micro forms, they look the way that we want. And also these look the way that we want. So let's commit that. And now we have that fixed. So yesterday we got users added to our application. We set up our authentication system, simple, minimal email password to drive sign in and sign up. And the goal today is to take advantage of our now present users, the presence of current user, to start weaving our users into the application. So there are a few places where we need to integrate users. So one is this needs to no longer be some static HTML. It needs to be driven by our current user. We need to use a anchored popover to fix our z-index issue. We need to integrate users into our task and list schemas so that we have tenancy, right? So Stephen can see his lists and tasks, but not John's lists and tasks. And John can see his lists and tasks, but not Stephen's lists and tasks. And then finally, we need to add support for assigning a task to a user. So let's jump into it. Let's close out the tabs that we don't need. And let's get to work. So let's pull up a little Scratchpad here. I think the most important feature, so the place to start, is with adding tenancy, right? So right now, all of our data is global. everyone and anyone can see everything and anything, which is typically not how you're going to want your application to work in production. For some applications, something like Hacker News, right? Or Reddit, that makes sense. But for most applications, some kind of tenancy makes sense. We aren't going to go down the route of teams right now. Maybe if I extend this series after I get back from vacation, we can push into that. Or maybe that's something that one of you all can work on and open a pull request for that. One of my hopes is that at the end of this series, when we have this application, we can use it as a resource for the community to explore some of these different advanced use cases. And some of you can work on some additional features as a way to explore some of these new Turbo 8 techniques, explore some specific ways to architect a database schema, or sort of do a full stack feature. So we're just going to do user tenancy, not teams. So let's go check out our schema. These are Rails tables. For us, we have 4 tables: lists, tasks, sessions, and users. Our users table is going to be our tenants table, right? So these are the records that will scope access to our other records. And we're going to follow the standard now, common pattern for building multi-tenancy into a web application of using a foreign key. And we're just going to spread this through the application, which is going to be easy for us because we don't have a very large schema as of now. So sessions are already scoped. They're already tenanted. A session belongs to a user. So what we need to do is we need to bring that into lists and tasks. They need to belong to a user. So let's think about how we're going to get there. We can generate a migration to add user ID to lists. We can say user belongs to, and we can do the same thing to tasks. And once we have that true at the database level, we can bring it into the model, from the model into the controller, from the controller into the views. So let's do this, the full sort of series, with lists first. So we have generated our migration. Going to use tenant as a verb here. And this does precisely what we want. Lists are going to have a reference to user, which can be non-nullable and is a foreign key. Perfect. Let's run that migration. And we're going to get an error because we have existing data, and that existing data will have a null value for user ID. So since we're still in early development, we can solve this problem by wiping our database. If you were in a context where you have an application and it's actually running in production and you have existing production data, the way that you're going to need to solve this problem, I'm just going to reference this. We have this really excellent gem in the Rails ecosystem, strong migrations, catch unsafe migrations in development, and even more usefully, it provides you with the safe alternative. So when we need to add a reference with Postgres, this is the setup. When we're dealing, let's see if we can find a generic one for a null column. Maybe check constraint will work. Yeah, Rails DB migrate redo is super useful. I'm not finding it quickly. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but the general idea is that let's pull up the migration. What you're going to do is you're going to initially run the migration. So you're going to have the first migration. You're going to add a column that is, you're just going to want to add a column. So add a nullable column. Then once you get that into production, you in production are going to need to run some kind of script to backfill the data. You are going to want to deploy this migration along with code changes that are going to populate that user ID for any newly created rows in this table. So you'll have old rows that have a null value, new rows have a value. You're going to run a script to backfill the data for the old rows. So fill in all of the nulls. Once that script has completed, and now all of your old rows have values, all of your new rows and future rows will have values because your application is going to put them in. Then you create a second migration to make the column non-nullable and to make a foreign key, and you deploy that. So that's like the process. You're going to need 2 different migrations, 2 different deployments, and you're going to need to do data backfilling in production. And that's how you do that if you were in a application that had production data. But we aren't, so we can do it the easy way. Let's just drop our databases. Who needs them? And then we will create them. And then we will migrate them. So now we don't have any users or sessions or lists or tasks, but our schema is in the shape that we want. So our lists now have a non-nullable user ID, which has an index and has a foreign key. Let's go to our model, and we're going to make sure to add our association. So lists now belong to a user. I try my best to do very atomic commits. It makes looking back into the evolution of a project so much easier if you can start to build the habit. So now that our database schema and our models are representing the state of things as we want them to be, let's come into our controller and think about how our controller needs to change to respect this new situation. So the first thing, index view. We don't want to show every single list in the entire database. We want to show the currently authenticated user their lists and none others. Well, we recall from our last stream that we are using a sort of pattern to opt all controllers into being protected, right? Into requiring authentication. So you lazily do nothing and your controllers are protected, are behind authentication. You have to manually intervene in your controllers to exclude them. So this controller and this action are protected and they do require authentication, which means that we can rely on the current user object being present. And we can get their lists. Now, we went into our model layer and we added this association, but we did not yet do the inverse. So let's make sure to add that association. And so now, when we get back our user instance, we can call the list method and get back an active record relation of all of the lists that do belong to the currently authenticated user. So now our data access for index is properly respecting our tenant. That is good. Next thing we need to do is set list. Instead of looking at every single list in the database to see which one does the URL's ID point to, which would allow anybody to go into their URL bar and just change the ID to any ID that they want. And if that ID existed in our database, they would view the contents. We don't want that either. We want to scope data access to our tenant. So we want to get this same list subset of data as we're using an index. And from that subset, attempt to find the particular list that was requested by this web request. And so if I am signed in and I change my URL to a valid ID for a list that John owns, it's not going to be found. I'm going to get a 404 error. Now, so this is data access. These are our read routes. Let's think about our write routes. We need to ensure that when new lists are created, that they have a value for our non-nullable user ID column. The simplest way to do that, in my opinion, is to keep the same pattern of getting our current user, getting the subset of lists that belong to that current user, and then using the active record builder that is available on that relation to construct a new list that inherits this scoping. So in our particular case, it's going to inherit the user ID column. And for clarity, I prefer to use the build method instead of the new method. And just to show, let's hop into a console just to show you that this does work if you haven't happened to have used this pattern before. So we don't have any users, so let's make one. Let me save what we make. So we can give it an email, john@mail.com. We'll give him a password, and in order to create a record with a password digest that has secure password, you need a password confirmation as well that needs to match. Now we have our user. If we do user lists, that relation returns nothing. And if we do build title hello world, let's save this in a variable, we get back a list instance that has not been persisted to the database, that has our title attribute and has our user ID attribute. And so we can then call save on this object and everything sort of falls out of that. we can reuse this in new, go ahead and scope the object that we pass down into our new view to the current user as well. Right now, we're not using that, but I like to just make it fully consistent in this controller to say, like, this is a resource that is tenanted. It belongs to our tenant. In our case, our tenant is the current user. So there are no references to the list model on its own. Everything is accessed through the current user. So now our database schema is in place. We have our associations set up in our models. We are using those associations in our controller to scope access. Right? So this is the barest form of an authorization layer. So once we authenticate a user, we ensure that that user is only able to see and to write and to take action on the appropriate subset of data that is associated to them. And so with that, there's nothing really that needs to change for our views for lists, because whether we're returning the full set of all of the lists in our database or we're returning a subset, the structure of those lists stays the same. There's nothing in our UI about who owns the list. It's not visually shown. It's just a presupposition of what you are seeing. So nothing needs to change in our views. We can just commit this. Let's say add authorization. Let's call it basic to ensure list controller actions always work with the current user's subset. So lists now belong to a user. Let's do the same thing with tasks. So we start off by generating a migration. Which does what we want. And we've already dropped our database, so we're going to be able to run this migration successfully. Non-nullable foreign key that connects tasks to user. Let's run our migration. And we see we get the updates we want. We get our user ID column, it's indexed, and we have a new foreign key. Let's now go into our models. So our task belongs to a user, and our user has many tasks. We can then come into our tasks controller. We can take these and replace them. Gonna need to remind myself where that's coming from. Set tasks, which we use in both index and show. So set task. And set tasks. We are scoping. And while I'm in here, one other small point. When you are setting up strong parameters, this is going to be easier to see in the list controller. It just has fewer parameters. As I talked about, I like to scope the new record that we use to drive our form for our new view so that we never see a bare list model, right? We always see current user scoping our access to that model. But you don't want to, typically, if you can avoid, like the default that you should pursue, right, is don't put like a hidden form field that has the user ID, and you just say, yep, okay, so I'm going to pass the user ID down from new. I'll put it into a hidden field in the form. I'll pass it back up, and I'll do this. And you don't want to do that because that hidden form field is just sitting there in your DOM, and anybody can open their inspector, go in, change the value to any other ID, and create in this case, a list that belongs to a completely different user than the currently authenticated user. If you were to say, do this pattern, and then up here in create, just do list new. So you don't want to pass around your tenant identifier into your forms. Handle all of that on your back end and handle it through authentication, which is being driven through some kind of secure session, typically a cookie, right? There's no need to put this information into the form to pass it back. It's already being passed back in the cookie of the request. You're going to get your current user as a part of the request handling. This is an authenticated route, so forth and so on. So another small point there, right? This, you don't always put every single database attribute into your forms. So whenever you follow this tenanting by adding a foreign key to your various tables, that is a column that by default you should never put into forms, and therefore never put into strong params, and so forth and so on. So we have all of this. A couple of edge casey points. Let me commit this as we talk about it. Couple edge casey points. So our schema has a bit of hierarchy to it. We have lists and we have tasks, and tasks can belong to lists. Optionally, they don't have to. Tasks can live on their own. So a couple of points here. The first point is, let's imagine a world where this was a forced hierarchy. This column here was no false. So every task belonged to a list. In such a world, you would have two options available to you. You could either add the user ID column here, just as you have here, or you could not. And if you decided not to, what you would be doing is you would need to ensure that you are accessing your tasks through the hierarchy. So in this case, we would do current user lists tasks, except this particular use of active record doesn't work. You can't call an association on a relation. So instead, what you would need to do is something like this. Get all of the tasks that belong to any of these lists, the current users lists. And as with any of these things, right, you could dry this up a bit if you wanted to. I try not to prematurely dry things up, but also that shows a little bit of the friction that can come if you say, well, I've got hierarchy here and I've got a forced hierarchy, so I'm just going to save the extra column. In my experience, I have ended up in a place where I prefer to just put the tenant ID, the foreign key, on all of the tables that are tenanted, so I don't have to do extra joins and I don't have to keep track of, oh, this particular model is the grandchild of our tenant, so I just need to follow the correct path. It simplifies things. That's my own preference, but you can certainly do the other. The key point is to be consistent and to not allow unauthorized access to your data. But in our case, it's optional. So we definitely have to have our user ID column here. But we need to think about situations where we are thinking about lists in the column, in the context of tasks, and think about the degree to which we need to scope them. So if we come here and we just look for list, we're doing a case insensitive search. We're going to see we do some ordering, grouping, but we are dependent on a task, so that's going to be scoped for us. List ID and list attribute, so that's going to be okay. But my eyes immediately do catch this, which is a bare reference to our task model. And again, this is one of the reasons I want to remove this everywhere, even in cases where I'm not really doing anything with it, because it will show me these things. So I see this and it is a code smell. Because what are we doing here? We want to get all of the unique labels for this subset of tasks, which is scoped correctly. Inside of here, we're running a SQL query that says, find me all of the tasks that have this label effectively, right? So labels is an array column. It's an array. So if any of the labels in that array are this label, then return that task. We're going to get a relation of tasks that are labeled with this label. But we're not doing any scoping in this context. So let me sort of make this more clear with some code. Let's say we've got task 1, task 2, and task 3. For right now, at tasks is task 1 and task 3. When we get our unique labels, we have label 1 and label 2. We map over them. And what we are hoping to get back on the other side, or not hoping, this is what we're going to get. We're going to get back a hash where our keys are our label names and our values are arrays of tasks. But if we imagine a world where task 2 has label 1, task 2 is not in our set of tasks, but when we take our unique labels and we map over them, when we look at label 1 and we ask the question, which tasks have label 1, we're going to get back task 2. And so currently we have a data access bug because were you to use our little grouping UI and group by label on the screen before, let's imagine, we're grouping by none, you would see only task 1 and task 3. But as soon as you grouped by label, you would see under label 1, tasks 1 and 2, and under label 2, task 3. And you never created task 2, it belongs to a different user, right? And I spotted that bug because of the bare reference to a model. Let's make this safer, take advantage of the fact that our map here is a closure and we have access to variables in the outside scope. So we only want to find the subset of our tasks list that have this label. Okay, and now our data access bug is fixed. We don't have any references to list. We could have a similar sort of problem with lists here if we had something like, whatever. So whenever you do have a hierarchy, it's important to go through and ensure that you're not breaking out of the constraints of your tenant system when working with that hierarchy. Okay. So now nothing changes about the forms, nothing changes about the UI. Everything will be working as before. We're not going to have anything. So we can sign in as John, the user that we created. We remember his password is password. Yes, I know. So we have no lists and we have no tasks. We can create my first task. We have to restart our server after our migrations. And we can make another task. We can make a list. And we can assign our first task to that list. Right? All of this is functioning as we would expect. And we can come into our console and just do a quick check, right? We only have the one list. It belongs to a user. Got the couple tasks. User ID is there. We know it is there. It has to be there. We have a database constraint. Database constraints are really wonderful. If you have been preached for years that you should minimize the logic in your database and put all of your logic in the application layer, there is certainly some wisdom to that. And I have worked on applications that have massive amounts of very large triggers and stored procedures, and it did make working on those applications in larger teams slower and more complicated, right? And that's the kernel of that wisdom. But never blindly take a overly generic interpretation of that wisdom and think, well, database constraints are database logic. I should minimize the amount of database logic, so I'm just going to put validations in my model layer in my application and not put constraints on my database. Your database is your source of truth. Your Ruby files in your Git repository for your models are not. So validations are useful to drive error messaging into your UI to make the experience for users clear and understandable. But to ensure that you have valid data, you have to have database constraints. That is the only way to ensure that. That is the only way to ensure that your source of truth is well defined, that the logic for what makes it well defined is defined, has to be co-located. So they have user IDs, and they definitely would have user IDs. And if we messed anything up in our application layer, we would not get funky data into the database. So all of that just to point out that the UI is still working, everything stays the same, but we have tenanted our system. And we can confirm that. Let's just go and sign up another user. So I'll sign up. Let's do Jane. I'm going to keep using password, even though Chrome is going to yell at us. And when we sign in as Jane, we see a bug. Perfect. We'll fix that. We don't see any tasks, but we do see this list, and we shouldn't. We did not create this list, so we should not see it. Let's go into our application layout where we have defined this navigation sidebar and check out how we are getting this list. And what we are almost certainly going to find is that we are running a database query in our views. And this is the classic example of why you really want to do your best to avoid that. Because when we were scanning our controllers earlier, right, our controllers were not over 100 lines. They're easy to scan and understand what they're doing. We could spot, I have a data access issue here. But when you start adding all kinds of database queries into your views, all of a sudden you have massively increased the surface area that you have to investigate to ensure that you don't have data access bugs. So when you centralize your database querying, your data fetching into your controllers, you have limited the surface area that you need to review to ensure that your data access logic is sound. So in our UL, we have got this. And this here is a problem. We're calling list all. We don't want to do that. So a couple ways to solve this, right? We could just immediately solve this. We could say, yeah, list all, that was stupid. Now we have current user and they have lists. Problem solved. Problem solved. But this is a Band-Aid solution because we are still making this database query here in our views. Which means, for example, were we to add team-based tenancy, so users authenticate, but users can belong to teams, they can be members of teams, they can be members of multiple teams, teams can have multiple members, and the team becomes our primary tenant, then we better remember to come back to this one file and this one line and change this bit of logic. It's going to be better if we centralize this and move this up into our controller layer. So let's think about how to do that. We're in our application layout. So this is something that we are doing for all of our authenticated requests. So probably makes sense to add into our application controller. And we can add another before action. And we can say set tasks. We can make this a private method. Let's let Copilot drive this for us. And okay, this could work. I've messed up the naming. Lists. This could work, but one small problem. This is probably overly generic because we have a list controller, and that list controller has an index action, and that index action follows standard Rails convention and defines an @lists instance variable. And so now for that particular action, we would be defining the @list instance variable twice. We can't have two instance variables of the same name with different values. So one is going to win, and we are only going to have one set of values. In this case, they happen to have the exact same values, but we can't always guarantee that. So we want to give this a name that is as likely as possible to be globally unique. So I just like to follow the pattern, the naming conventions, what we're doing. And I'll just call it, these are our application lists. And now down here, we just use the data that we have stuffed into this instance variable. And this solves our problem. Just about. One final little point. We opt every controller action into this before action. This before action references current user, but we know from authenticatable that there are some controller actions that won't have access to current user because those are the controller actions that are driving our authentication system. They are public routes. So just to show you what would happen if we tried to go right now to sign up, we're going to get an error because we presume current user is present. So we need to safeguard this. We could safeguard it in a few different ways. We could add like an if condition. And we could have this method. We could add this, and then we could take this, and we could even make it a helper method available to us in our views. All right. And now things do work. We could do the same thing logically here. This, at this point, it's kind of preference. I'm just going to leave it like this. But now we have tenanted our tasks and our lists. Not too bad. Of course, this is a relatively simple app. There's relatively few models, but the patterns are solid patterns. They scale pretty well. I've used them in much larger applications. Now that we have tenanted our core models, the next two options that are available to us, we could work on assignees, or we can work on current user. I will give the chat 20 seconds. If you have a preference and you want to see one instead of the other, let me know. I'm fairly ambivalent in which direction we go in next. Marco says assigns. Let's do assigns. Quick sketching as we go. So we're definitely going to need to generate a migration, and we're going to need to add something to tasks. And it's going to be something belongs to. And then we're going to need to go in and change that migration to make it optional. I say something because it's like, well, what is the table that we are jumping to? Well, we're associating tasks with users, right? But we can't do this. We just did that. That's right here. So we can't have two user ID columns. All right, so we're going to need to, I should call it like that. Call it something else, but we need to point it to the user table. So let's look at how we get our migration to do this. Let's generate this migration first, and then we will talk about the alterations. OWISE. Is the UI here custom made or using something? It's custom made in that I wrote all of the HTML and CSS myself. I didn't imagine any of it, right? I just looked at these screens and tried to make them real. You can see where this all started here. I will post this in the chat. So I built this CodePen. I'm using Tailwind to drive my styling. Let's change it to this mode. And I did hand roll it. I wish I didn't have to, but Superlist is a Flutter application, and it doesn't generate actual DOM. It paints pixels on a canvas. So I couldn't even copy and paste their HTML, those stingy bastards. But yeah, I'm not using any particular component framework. I am just using HTML and Tailwind to drive the CSS. Did we finish this? Wait. Let me grab this. And the other thing, just the one small point, I did not stream me writing that HTML. The sort of series of events was I saw a tweet announcing Superlist is now publicly available. I'm like, oh, I like to check out new applications, sort of see what they do with UI and UX, see what kind of techniques are there. I went and checked it out, and I immediately thought, hey, this is like pretty simple. There's not a lot of models here. Um, but the stuff that they're doing with transitions and with, you know, updating state in one place and having it, damn it. I'm going to be stuck because we got to mutate that migration. Anyway, like you complete a task from the details view. Let me do it over here. Complete a task. This changes, this view changes. Like I just immediately saw that this would probably be a good study case to dive deeper into the new Turbo 8 features of view transitions and morphing. And so I was like, let me just copy and paste their HTML. Saw it was a Flutter view. It's like those stingy bastards. Let me just copy it visually. And then I started streaming building the Rails app. So the code pen, building the code pen, I don't have a stream of. Okay. Back to our migration. Thanks, Assignees, or Ahmed, whichever is your first name, both of your names. Thank you. It's been fun doing it. So we need to add a reference from tasks to the user table, but we need the column to be assignee ID. This is where I don't know, add reference. I've typically done this like this. And then, right, okay, I bet you it's the same. I was about to say, so what you do is instead of true, you pass a hash, but then I'll do it here. I'm sure that's the same. Yep. So what I've typically done. So instead of the simple Boolean value for foreign key, you can also pass a hash. That hash has various options. There's a few others. I don't know all of them. Two tables is the key one, right? So we say that adding a reference from tasks to assignee, which means it's going to generate an assignee ID column. We want it to be null true, right? It's optional. Not every task must have an assignee. Some tasks can have an assignee. And it is a foreign key, but it doesn't point to a table called assignees. It points to a table named users. Right. And so if we run this migration, clean this up. Then we will see we get our integer assignee ID column. It is indexed. And our foreign key goes from tasks to users, just like this foreign key, but it specifies that it's looking at a different column. Commit that. Come back here. So that is like the key detail whenever you need to have multiple different relationships from one table to another. Learning that option is key. So let's pull up our task. We've got our user. Let's keep those two together. So our task also belongs to an assignee, but that's an optional association. And we need to tell the Rails layer, the association method, that don't expect there to be an assignee class. We are pointing at the user class. And then here, we can Thank you, Copilot. Though, yeah, actually, that probably makes sense. So we can create a new association, call it something like assign task. This is as good a name as any. Again, Rails by default is going to infer a class name based on the association name, but we don't have an assigned task model. So we need to tell it explicitly. This is the class model class to look at. We need to tell it explicitly the foreign key, right? So on the task model, the assignee ID column is going to match the primary key of this model. That's the convention for has many in Rails. And then we want to nullify and not destroy, right? Because in this case, if a user is assigned to task one, and then that user deletes their account, that shouldn't remove from existence task one, which was created by a different user, right? Like that task should absolutely still exist, but it shouldn't have a assignee ID value that points to a non-existent row, right? Now that the user has removed themselves. And so instead, we want to nullify that value. So in these cases, like where it's a strong belongs to, right, a required foreign key, we want to destroy, right? So when a user is deleted, delete their sessions, delete the list that they created, delete the tasks that they created, but not their assigned tasks. So set up our associations. Have to do a little bit of massaging there to get them set up. Do an atomic commit here. Associations between task and user for assignees. Just push this up so people can see it. And now we can go into our controller and add our strong param. So haven't yet got down into the views, but we definitely are going to want to allow some kind of form somewhere in our views to pass the assignee ID, and we will use that to update the appropriate database row. This is another pattern. I try to follow this habit. I'm not great with it, but to sort of work my way from database to model to controllers to views in order to ensure that I add the strong parameter before I get to the views, because if I don't sort of keep that pattern and that order of operations, I forget to add the strong parameter, and then I build the form, and then the form doesn't work, and I'm annoyed, and it takes me 5 minutes to go and check my request logs and see unpermitted parameter. Ugh, so stupid. So just doing it in this order helps prevent that minor annoyance. So let's go into we're going to look at this view first. And we need to make this work. So let's find it first of all. We've got our I think I'm looking in the wrong place. This is our details view. This is our list view. So in index, we render main, and in main, we render our collection. So anyway, this is where we want to be. We've got our button to toggle completion. not what we're looking for. We've got our task title or our task title input, not what we're looking for. Icon person, and now we're talking. So this is what we are looking for. Let's put a little bit of space here. Step one, we need to go from this details summary with absolute positioning and trying to get z-index to work, but it doesn't work. If you haven't watched all of the streams, in a past stream, I don't remember the exact number, something like 4 or 5, I talk about this problem. And I talk about it in more depth. The key detail here is that whenever you have a z-index problem like this, to solve that problem, well, okay, let me just look at the time. 3 minutes. We're not going to spend any more than 3 minutes on this because I'm about to rip all this out. When you see this problem, what it means is that this element has some z-index applied to it. It might not even be explicitly applied. It can just be position relative or position absolute. By default, the way that browsers resolve z-index issues is later in the DOM means higher on the z-index. And the way that we lay out our DOM, if we look at our layout file, this is at the top of the file, this is in the middle of the file, this is at the end of the file. So this comes later. So somewhere in the tree to render this bit, I don't know where exactly, we have an element that has either position relative or position absolute. It's going to be position relative because there's nothing absolutely positioned inside of here. And somewhere else in this tree, probably, we have something that has an explicit z-index. Hell, it's probably z50. And so these things are tied. And so the later one wins. Let's see if we can bump this up to 60. Doesn't quite win. What you're going to find in these situations is that, like, you can bump this as much as you want. It's not going to solve your problem. The only way to solve your problem is you have to find the two sibling elements that contain whichever two elements are conflicting. So you have to find, so this is obviously this div inside of our details is one part. We need to see which element exactly is covering it. Then you need to trace their ancestors until you find two siblings. And then you have to manually, what you're going to see is that, like, I've got two siblings. This one comes first, this one comes second. And I want a descendant of the first one to be on top of a descendant of the second one. And so you have to put those two siblings, you have to make them both position relative, and then you have to explicitly give them z-indexes to say the element that comes first in the DOM should have a higher z-index than the element that comes second in the DOM. So you would do relative z20, relative z10, or relative z10, relative z0, like whatever. And that would solve this problem. And anytime you had these problems, you have to do that. And as you added more elements that had z-index, you would have to keep this whole system of, like, relative positioning for everything to work and find all the right elements. And it's a total mess. You don't want to do it, which is why instead we use our popover, anchored popover pattern, which uses the new popover API, the still in active development CSS anchoring API to put popovers in the top layer, and it completely avoids the index issues. So let's replace detail summary with another popover. And let's just make this. So we're going to call this the assignee popover form. And we want this to be a form as well, right? We're going to be mutating state. And let's take our list popover. I want to copy the list popover because, pardon me. Right now we have 3 different patterns for our popover. So labels, has many association. You can assign many labels to a task. This is more a menu style. So these are a list of links. But list is a has one. So labels uses a collection of checkboxes. List uses a collection of radio buttons. What is an assignee? It is a has one, not a has many. So it's going to be closest to what we have done with lists. So I'm just going to copy all of that over. And we will get to work changing it. I'm just going to start by making these small changes and then coming in here doing this. I'm going to stash this here so that we can see what we have in there. But now, nosy index problem. And we get the secondary benefit that we're using auto popovers. And so the browser automatically ensures that only one auto popover is open at a time. Whereas detail summary, you can have 50 of them open on the page. So very nice. We just need to update the inner UI to not be this list UI. So I no longer need this. This is doing what we want. We just need to get this working. So we don't care about anything but this. And let's pull it up. So we're going to have the same. Let's rename our variable to be a little bit more correct. I want to show this pattern. So in some of these cases, they show an icon plus like some kind of identifier, text identifier. With assignee, they just use avatar. So we're not going to do that. We'll write a if-else condition later to show the icon or show the avatar once we sort of stabilize avatars for users. I need to rename the stimulus controller because we use it with both checkboxes and radios, but that's a small detail. Our search is going to be a bit different. So with a list, well, yeah, that's not a feature that we actually built a new feature. For labels, you can create a label directly inside of the popover. We definitely don't want that. Search for name, they say. Okay. Which means we don't need to do any cloning, which means we don't need this controller and we don't need this template. To understand what all of that stuff is, you can watch previous streams. But other than that, we want to execute the search function when we use this, and all of this should just look the same. So that's good to go. Our form is going to autosave. We want that. We're going to use radio buttons. You can only have one at a time. Data access problem. We need to solve this. But we'll get this working first. So We're going to have assignee. We definitely want to use ID, but what is for the value, but for the label, they are using name. We presently don't have that for users. We just have email and password. So for now, we'll do that. And since this is not true, we'll make the interface coherent. And I want to change this, make this unique. But the rest of this is the same. We don't have avatars right now, so we're going to keep using icons, but we'll change it from the list icon to the person icon. Want to be able to clear it, want to be able to submit it. Yeah, that looks reasonable. So oh, right. Oh, I forgot to change. We need to talk about this, but let's just get it working. John and Jane. Let's assign it to Jane. Let me go ahead and clear this so we can see. I think I need to have restarted my server after the migration, but we'll find out. No, we're good. So we started patch. We updated. We set assignee ID to 2. Then we redirected. So now this is assigned to Jane. We can't see that. We need to do our avatar stuff, but we do see it here. And we can clear. This is flashing. Why is it flashing? I just just yesterday, it wasn't flashing. If you saw my stream yesterday, you would have seen like it wasn't flashing. Okay, another thing, investigate. But there you go. And let's do search. Are we not telling it? Search target. Input. That should definitely work. We should be able to fix this quickly. I'm very we look at the value, which for labels makes sense because their value is the text. But for both of these, this isn't going to work either. We always show, let me just deselect this. We always show whichever one is selected. Yeah, so it's just never going to work. For the inputs themselves, yeah, they're not going to have any reference to it. So what is the simplest thing to do? Okay, I think the simplest thing to do is to change what we target. And we should target whatever the text is. Like wherever we have the content that we want to search against. So we should do this, this, and I shouldn't name it that. And then we just change. This condition. This is why we want the input. Okay, let's leave input. And add text. But now I need to like bind these two. Okay. Let's not do that. Let's add another data attribute here. So inside of data, let's call search value. I don't need that in this context. I need to remind myself, I don't use it as often. How you can use values in stimulus. And this is like a kind of classic use case. So let's call this text. So you want the controller name, then the value name, then the word value. So we're going to go search text value. But that's at the controller. We need to bind this here. So yeah, we don't need to use values. We're just going to have to look up the data set. Yep, Marco said the same thing. So we're going to call this element. Nope, we'll call it input. Yep, exactly. We can use data set. So we're going to say, so for the input, we expect there to be a data attribute that we can call text value. I'll use the same sort of we'll make it explicit in the HTML, so we'll connect it to the controller. So search text value. So that gives us our, let's call this search value. Okay. Let's try this again. Much better. And just really quick, we should update the other places that are using this. So we want to say search text value builder.text. And the same for our list. And for both of them, whoops, don't want to forget about our templates down here. But we don't need it. It's not being searched. It's only being generated as a part of cloning. So it's always going to be present. Update the existing popover forms to use the new search stimulus controller. Okay, cool. Allow task assignee ID to be set via a new popover form. So, sorry, there we go. We can set the assignee, clear the assignee, search for our users. Functionally, we're good to go. Now, I said there's something we need to talk about, which is right here. This is a pretty clear sign that in order to make this a production ready application, we're going to need to introduce teams, because we have to have some way to group subsets of users together where all of the users have very clearly opted into allowing the other users in that subset to know that they exist in the system. At the moment, when it comes to users, we only have an individual, current user, or the full set. And in general, you can anticipate this kind of problem. If you have an application where the user table is used for something beyond current user, for something beyond the authentication. So like this, like assignees, right? You are going to hit this same problem, and the only real viable solution, right? Because you can't just, I mean, you could, but you have to make it pretty clear, right? To people, say like, if you sign up for this, anyone else at any point who signs up for this will see your email address. If you make that super clear and people still sign up, technically it's possible. You need to have like terms and conditions, and you should have a checkbox and make, because the default expectation for users on the internet is that you aren't going to be sharing their personal identifiable information freely to anyone and everyone. And an email address, I'm pretty sure, is considered personal identifiable information. Whether or not it is legally, I don't know. I haven't been in a court case for that, but conventionally it is. So, and whether or not it was the email address, if it's just the name or whatever, right? So for now, this is the only solution that we can use because we don't have teams, and it would take us a while longer to add them in. But that is a feature that we are going to need to add were we to actually try to put this into production. Right, so for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a to-do comment here just to remind ourselves at this point of the code. We need a team model to scope so future work. So functionally, the last major detail, which starts to get us into current user as well, is we want to ensure that in this view, it is immediately obvious which tasks have an assignee and which don't, part one, and part two, who the assignee is. All right, so when an assignee is set, we see two things. One, this popover value is permanently shown, not just shown on hover. And two, it shows the avatar of the user. And those avatars are shown in this list as well. Instead of doing pictures and all of that, let's just use generated avatars like we have built down here and like we did in our static demo. But in order to make this a little bit more manageable, I think it makes sense to make this a helper function. So let's grab this. Yeah, that's what I wanted. And let's come back over here. And instead of our icon, we don't really need that. We just need the email, which in our case is builder.text. Let's allow you to set the size. We'll default it to 4. But I was about to do this, but this is going to break Tailwind's ability to know that this class was used. So I'm just going to be lazy instead and do this. Not lazy, it's just, so I was going to start enumerating and then it's like, it just gets out of mess. This is better. I don't know, size 3, size 4. We will see. But we've got all this other stuff here too, which might be relevant. Definitely the stuff about if the peer is checked. But actually it might not. Like they're just using pictures. They don't change any of that. Let's leave it. Let's leave it out for now. Let's try. Of course, these start with the same letter, so it's not super useful. Um, but, sets a foundation. And then we can come up here. Put this back. And we can do, I have to think about what I want that to be. I just want to get the structure in first. And I think I want to reverse these. So if task dot assignee ID present, then do that. If we clear it, just a user. We haven't gotten all of like the hover stuff exactly the same, but step by step. Show basic user generated avatars. I have a whole other helper, which maybe at some point, maybe we'll keep pushing on this after my vacation. We'll see. I've got a lot of other stuff I need to do after my vacation, but here and there, I've got this whole other stimulus project that would be cool here. Let me just show you. I think it was 3. Yep. This came onto my radar years ago, maybe. And as these things go, it's a React component. One of the things that nerd snipes me more often than maybe I would like is seeing a relatively simple, very well scoped, small UI widget that is built as a React component and thinking, A, that's cool. B, that would be useful. C, that doesn't seem overly complicated. And D, I want to try to build that in Stimulus. So this is an avatar generator. But instead of just generating avatars with characters, you can also generate avatars with shapes. And they mix and match colors. So instead of just always being blue and white, you get these different colors. But it is deterministic. So if you put the same text in, you're going to get the same result every single time. They've got these sets of colors, background colors and text colors, and these set of shapes. I even have more shapes. Is it the same designer? Yeah. So this same designer later, 2.0. So this, I believe, is just basically Shapes 1.0. Added a bunch of new shapes, and I integrated that in there. And so I've got like this really cool avatar controller, which deterministically, handles the coloring and the shape, and you can do text or you can do shapes. And I've even integrated it with like if you want to upload a image and like set your avatar, and like you can do a lot of really fun stuff. And I'd like to show that to you at some point, but now is not that point because it certainly take me more than 20 minutes. But how's that for a teaser? I think we have assignees though. As far as, I want to push it. The core functionality is there. Let's get this to use that same avatar helper and a anchored popover next. All the rest of this we don't need. So in our application layout, in our main sidebar, down here, this is where we've got this and the whole, all this. Time to set up a, what do we want to call this? It's a popover menu. User popover menu. That works. It's going to be closest to grouping. And you know what? I called this a form. That's stupid. I should rename this. This is a menu as well. Yeah, there we go. It's going to be closest to this. Let me just there we go. We don't need a view transition name. Oh, I want to change that. User popover menu. Now, inside of this, we just want to use our avatar for current user email. And then we want all of these. Yep, all of those. In here. We'll change that to a div. Doesn't need to be a UL. Oops, don't need any of those. I want to just clean this one up as I'm here too. Yeah. I think that looks pretty good. Let's give it a try. Actually, let's pass the user in. That's a bit better. Magic Comet, Rails 7.1, check it out, is great. Let me be more explicit then. And we need to be able, we want to set the size class. And then we go and look. I forgot what we had before. Size 8. And we're rendering on the bottom. We want to put it on the top. Our anchoring CSS needs to be made a bit more flexible. What do we name this? Not being applied. Top. I did this backwards. This is not top or bottom. I may. My thinking was backwards here. This one is bottom or top. This one is top or bottom. I might not have reversed these. I did that. Just logic is hard. And then in here, you can never resist it. Yeah, I resist it regularly. Come on. Top or bottom. Data position top is what I want. Top or bottom. Yeah, this is annoying. I just have to study more about how to do positioning. I'm not expert at it yet. I was expecting it to do. Yeah, they're doing the exact same thing. Try the bottom of the popover, the I'm lost. I'm not gonna stay lost. I gotta stay focused. Um, don't want that either. Yeah, there clearly is enough space, which is why I'm. Yeah, it's a bit. What did I have before? Come on. This whole new positioning API, going to need to get a bit clearer on that. Let's just replace these classes. Yeah. What I was using Chrome. Notice this view transitions. CSS positioning API. Tether elements together using anchor positioning. The anchor is here and the boat is on top. I like that. And it's sort of centered. Let's see if we can. Anyway, let's get back to this. When we have that, let's see. Why, oh, why? Anchor, wrapper, anchor. So there's this mode, which is where I got fallback. So the first one is this. Let's just try. Yeah, I have it in a try block right now, which is why I'm trying to just pull it out and explicitly say bottom anchor, top. I'm not saying which anchor. It might blow up. Oh, I think I changed this to bottom in my anger. I need to change that back. But it's still being a jerk. I need like. I still have position fallback here. So if I get rid of that, if I do. So I can be more explicit, but I need to do probably unset. And left, anchored left. Which is what I almost had. I had to flip these. So try. So this is I'm using this poorly and backwards. I think we've just been why is it not putting this stuff up top? Bottom, anchor top. This is probably not going to work again. No, so this now works. I'm actually confused as to why this comes down. There is so much to learn about these new DOM APIs. So if I put this back in, so now this is like the exact same. Is it going to flip it? I presume so. Yes. Which is interesting. If I flip the order, same effect. I'm really going to have to read up on like what these tries are doing. I presumed that it was, sort of like programming language. So try the first one. And if it sits in the viewport, then stop. You're good. You've positioned it. Way to go. So I don't understand what they are doing because the order is not affecting how it renders. So instead of this position fallback stuff, let's do some explicit stuff instead. Simplify what we are doing. Oh, close call. I need to do top unset in this case. Yep, okay. Hello there. Well, now we're having fun. So we've got our anchor. What is, come on, show me an error or something. Top. Why is top? Why is that not working? All right, let's just try what we did in the other one. I really wish it would like show me what it is doing, like why it's doing that. Let's go to our labels pop over. Let's add data position bottom. So if I go to the list popover, So this is doing something funky. Let's get rid of it here. So list doesn't have it now. So label, list. Yeah, so the order there. That inset was blowing stuff up. I mean, I don't know what else it could have been. So I think that inset. So this, but this. Okay. That was fun in a very not kind of fun way. But let's and that simplify our CSS for anchoring popovers to allow for top and bottom position with bottom as default. Anyway, this is now behaving the way that we wanted. So let's just, the text could be a bit bigger, but well, I say that, but it is annoying. So let's fix it. How can we make the text size dependent on our height and width? I think that that's what we want. So instead of text XS, let's say text 50%. Let's see what that does. That's small. Let's say text 90%. That's bigger. Let's say text 100%. So it's got some padding. So that's bigger. And then down here, that's not what I expected, I confess it. Font size M. If I use M's down here, does it? Nope, because the size is just setting height and width. Well, I'm just leaving it for now. Set up the user popover menu in the navigation sidebar to use the current user. Okay. So, users. we're done with the functionality that I wanted to get to, and I'm at 2 hours, so I could just stop. I'm trying to think about where we're at and where we could go. So tomorrow is the last day that I can stream before I go on vacation for the next 2 weeks. And I really want to end this series of streams with the application in a coherent, usable, interesting state. So I'm trying to take a bit of a step back here and think about what that would mean, right? So, for example, I need to wire this up and remove some of these things that don't do anything. These are wired up. This is totally static. We don't have messages. We're not tracking recently used lists. So let's pull out a few things that we're not using. So, for example, messages. We're not doing anything with messages. And we can't leave a message. So let's simplify that. We can also pull out recent. We are not sort of tracking, doing anything with that. We'll just have lists, all of your lists. Let's take our assignee popover form. Which is used here, and make sure that we are also using it. 3 dots vertical person here, which is here. We need to wrap it in something with ML auto. In this context, it was a bit bigger. Let's see what we're looking at here. Size 2.5, but minor detail. I don't want to mess with all of that. All the rest of this stuff is the same size except for the title. I'm going to have to get that try logic figured out so that I'm not just forcing it to be on the left-hand side. I wonder if I can just leave it out altogether. It's gonna make a guess if I do anchor right. So this is the right-hand side, and that's where it starts. And I guess if I do anchor left, it'll just shift a little bit to the left because our anchor, it shifts a little bit to the left. So to have it oriented the other direction altogether, I have an example of like pushing it as if it's text right oriented. Top to bottom. Anchor. What does that do? Yeah, it just sort of names it and attaches it. I want to do like, I don't know, negative. Something. Way over there. Wait. If I do right, pin the right side. There we go. Of course. Ooh, these use the same anchor name. These use the same anchor name. I need to be careful about that. When you render a partial, what kind of context do you get? How do I get like the caller, as if this were a Ruby function? Yeah, I don't know. Let's just make it explicit. You set up a context. So we also call it in collection. And we will say collection details. Render. I mean, what do I have to fucking pass them in? Locals? Like, what is this? Why is it not seeing this as just a set of options? understand. Wait, is this actually a problem with my DOM ID? If I remove this, does this error? Maybe this is sort of pointing in the wrong direction. It's pointing in the wrong direction. I'll just have them both be on the right. Yep. This is going to be a problem for all of my popovers. I think we bumped into this. This is useful. All right, assignee. That's good to go. Let's look for grouping popover. Oh, that's only used once. I don't need this one. It's the other ones. Labels. And list. And so the places where we call labels popover. Actually, I think can I change you? And the place where we call list. Where do we have? Where is this problem? Encountered a syntax error. What is our... Okay. So when we figure out how to do our try position fallback thing such that these can all be left aligned and then this one can be right aligned, that'll be nice. But for now, let's just get this working. Ensure all popovers present in both collection and details sections have unique names. Default all popovers to right aligned until we figure out fallback positioning logic. Right. So other things that just don't do anything right now. I think I'm just going to pull out the stuff that is non-functional for the time being. It's all in Git history, right? We can start bringing it back as we want to make it functional. So the stuff that's non-functional, this doesn't do anything. This doesn't do anything. All of these links don't do anything. We can leave one of them for, we'll leave new team and settings, and we will work to actually build those pages. Delete task, copy link. We can leave those two. I think delete task might actually, doesn't yet. We can make that work. I think we have it for lists. And then this we will delete for now. I want to add it back. There's a lot of fun stuff to get into here that I want to do. But in the desire to like make this coherent, actually, I'll leave the calendar for now. Maybe we can push on that tomorrow. That would be a fun thing to do. What is this? Where is this coming from? A absolute after. So this is right after our emoji popover list. So our new list, form, application lists. Let's look at this. Yeah, that makes sense, but I'm just like, it's all in here. It's like we shouldn't have any application lists in this context. But we have an in-memory one. Oh, right. We have an in-memory one, which we just created. Oh, come on. You can't scope. This is stupid. There has to be a way to do this. Active record. Get relation of only persisted records. Do I really have to add my own scope? I don't want to do this. That's like... Okay, let's try this. Where not ID nil. The in-memory one is coming from, like, we're on list new. So we are calling, we're instantiating a new list to drive this form. And it doesn't have like a title. And so this is nil. So the first argument to link to is nil, and you have all these other problems. So we want this. No, not on this instance variable. Not on the application list instance variable, no. But in list controller new, but because we are scoping, so like we're using build on this scoped call here, right? We're not calling list.new because, my whole spiel about wanting to not see any bare visual lists in a scoped controller. And then we're similarly doing the same scoping here. So this object is being cached and kept in memory, and it's being mutated. So we're building, like, if I did this, I think we would be probably, fine. And I could even do that, I think, and we'd be okay. No, it's, active record's going to introspect it either way. Oh, that's smart too. I'll take that. It's not that smart. Anyway. We cleaned that up. We can clean that up for list too. We haven't built that at all. It's all under main. Yeah. I'm pretty sure this one does work. Yeah. So we can bring that over. Anywho, mostly I want to be hanging on here. And in our user popover menu, we can drop these. And I only need those ones. And in our task, I'm at this one. And subscribe isn't a thing. We don't have subtasks. And we can go to our list main and just bring this over. Wonderful. Let's make a few atomic commits, and then I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to see. I'm not 100% certain right now if I'm going to be able to stream tomorrow. It depends on how much packing we get done today and what other stuff we have to do, errands we have to run and things. So as I have a clearer picture, I will tweet about it. Our app, remove action buttons. Don't plan on building that. Okay. Sent all of that up. So the app, feels pretty close. It definitely needs some love and some polish. If I wanted to try to make money off of this, which I don't because I don't want to get sued by Superlist. There are a few more things to do to make this fully fleshed out. This whole new form, like, it doesn't respect, like, these things are not integrated into the form. They're also static. We don't have our keyboard shortcut. We can't actually dismiss this. This doesn't go anywhere. We don't have a today view. Our task needs a due date. We need to be able to drive that. We need a profile page. We do need to add the concept of teams. So to get to like feature complete, there's still some work to do. But as an exercise in sort of sprinting in a Rails application, digging into some of these newer features available in browsers, whether that's view transitions, whether that's the popover API, the CSS positioning API, getting familiar with how to properly set up and then think about and make sure your application is well architected to make use of the new Turbo 8 morphing feature. This has certainly been a success. Hopefully, I will have an hour or two tomorrow to push a little bit further on this. If I do have that time, I want to work on some MVP version of this. I'm not going to be able to do reminders or repeats, but as much of this as we can. And we can also try to clone this settings page, profile page. We could add first name, last name. We could add an avatar image. We can delete account, sign out. We don't really have this stuff. One small thing for anyone who hasn't been hanging around. I got to fix that positioning, but this works. I forgot about that when I was just going through feature complete. So I will keep you updated. Obviously, the other big thing that we would have to tackle to get ready for production is to start doing some research, see if somebody has already figured out how to solve the problem that tricks and morphing do not play well together. One would wish, but they don't. Hopefully, someone has solved that problem. We can find that solution, bring it into our app. Um, so as always, work to do, but I am really happy with the progress that we made in 9 days, 2 hours, give or take, a pop. This has been a really great learning experience, and having this repository um, means we'll always be able to make progress, even if it is 2 weeks from now. And if you want to explore some of these techniques and tools by taking one of these features and building it, um, that would be really, really cool. Open a pull request. Or once I get back from vacation, you can ping me if you want to do a pairing session. Yeah. Anyway, I think that is it for today. I have to run. So thanks for hanging out, and I will let you know if I'll be back tomorrow. Other than that, goodbye.